featuring the team from Des Moines Public Schools. We'll talk more about what they're doing to ensure that all students in their district have access to strong, diverse, and equity-oriented school leadership. We will conclude the panel at the end of the hour, and then there's probably going to be about additional 15 minutes or so for Q&A discussion with the panelists. So for those of you who have joined us previously, this will be familiar to you. But this session is organized through the Alliance for Resource Equity, which is a partnership between Education Resource Strategies and the Education Trust. The goal of the Alliance is to bring stakeholders together to improve education resource equity in all of our schools. You can visit us online at educationresourceequity.org. My name is Betty Chang. I'm a partner at ERS, and I will be kicking off our conversation today. So let me just take a brief moment to explain what we mean when we say resource equity. When we say this, we're talking about how resources are being allocated and used to unlock better and more equitable experiences in schools for all students. And it's really important to note that when we talk about resources, we are not just talking about funding. We are talking about what we call the 10 dimensions that really impact the student experience, because it's not just about how much money you spend, right? It's also about how well you use that money to create experiences for students. And so when we think about resource equity, yes, we are talking about how funding is being distributed, but we also want to look at whether students have equitable access to strong teachers, strong school leadership, engaging instruction, positive school climate, and so much more. So today's session, we are going to focus on school leadership, quality, and diversity, and why it's so important. And because, as you all know, districts are faced with an unprecedented challenge right now, but it's also an unprecedented opportunity. We all know the situation, right? Learning disruption as a result of the pandemic is significant, and it's not affecting everyone equally. And we know that supporting and investing in our school leaders is going to be critical in our learning recovery and acceleration efforts. But we also know that we have an existing inequity in our school systems, where students from low-income backgrounds and students of color were already less likely to have access to effective school leadership prior to the pandemic. And so, as districts are thinking now about return to school and how to use new ESSER funding, it's so important that we really think about how we address this underlying inequity. And I know there's been lots of discussion right now. Really, the focus about ESSER spending is really on how do we rapidly respond to meet student needs through things like high dosage tutoring or extending time. And that is all so important. But I think we also think that this is a moment for districts to invest in school leaders, right? In thinking about how they can change their underlying pipeline and career path practices that are contributing to inequitable access to great leaders, how districts can be investing in building school leadership capacity around equity-oriented practices through professional learning or collaboration, and just invest in school leaders in a way that will continue to have impact long after the stimulus funds runs out. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here because you're all here, so you get how important this is. But in case you're looking for some data to go out and convince your colleagues about why we really need to be investing here, we know that research shows that having a highly effective school leader can significantly boost student learning and achievement. So there's sort of a couple of recent studies that have come out that show that replacing a below average principal with an above average principal can actually add almost 3 months, more months of learning in a single school year. And we also have studies that show that the presence of a Black principal can boost Black students' math achievement, even if Black teachers aren't present in the building. And of course, we know this is happening because school leaders achieve this through the many, many ways in which they influence the experience of the students and teachers in their building. And so we can definitely share the links to these studies. And the impact of great school leaders is so just valuable and important. And so that's what we're going to talk about today in our panel, which will be facilitated by Dr. Mary Rice-Boothe. She's the Chief Access and Equity Officer at the Leadership Academy. And we are so thrilled that she's able to join us today to bring her expertise from more than 20 years of experience as a teacher, principal, mentor, and coach, and to share what they've learned through supporting many, many school systems in doing this work, including the team from Des Moines. So Dr. Mary Rice-Boothe, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Betty. And thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. And first, before I jump in, I do want to recognize the fact that I'm sitting on ancestral lands of the Jomanas and the Tonquina tribes, also known as Austin, Texas. And I'm really excited to be able to hear from two amazing leaders in Des Moines, Gilmara Mitchell and Peter LeBlanc. I've had the honor of working with both of them and have seen the work that they are incredibly dedicated and invested in Des Moines. And I'm excited for you to hear more and more about their work, how they came into this role, and the advice and suggestions that they have for you in your districts. But before we dive in, I do want to give you a little bit of a background of the Leadership Academy and the work that we do and why we do the work and how we have grounded a lot of our current thinking in the past year. So the Leadership Academy started over 18 years ago in New York City. We started as an aspiring principals program. And since then, we've had the opportunity to not only expand our services, starting with teacher leader all the way through to school board, but we've also been able to really broaden the arc of not just New York City, but we now have worked with over 37 states across the country. And as you see here, our vision and our mission is really grounded in school leaders and making sure that school leaders have the ability to make sure that every single student that walks through their doors, virtually or in person, is met with experiences that is intentionally built for them. And of all their intersectional identities, including race, ethnicity, and language. And so moving forward, one thing that we have grounded our work in this past year is our definition of a culturally responsive leader. And for us, a culturally responsive leader means first, you have to recognize the impact of institutionalized racism on your life. Then you have to recognize how it impacts the students and the families that you work with. And then you have to act, right? So you have to do that reflection. You have to really invest in your interpersonal relationships. And then you have to, every single day, ensuring that you're mitigating, disrupting, and dismantling systemic oppression. And how we've broken down this even further into our actions. And so we have developed a framework that embraces these 8 actions that you see on the screen and really connected our definition to the actions. So if you move to the next slide. Thank you. So when you really think about personally, right? So how does the impact of institutionalized racism impact my life? You can lean on the actions of leading for equity and access. You can lean on the action around engaging in personal learning and development. And so what that looks like is for leaders is really thinking about, for many leaders is thinking about their privilege and their white privilege. And for equity officers, oftentimes, since equity officers are most times are coming from a space of a minoritized population. So it really is about thinking about internalized oppression and the role of assimilation, and how does that show up in your position. And that second part around being a culturally responsive leader is about those interpersonal skills. And for us, you can really lean on the actions of aligning mission and vision and values, as well as cultivating community care and engagement. And what that could look like for teachers and leaders is to ensuring that the day after the insurrection, did you create space in your schools and in your buildings in order to have conversations about what just happened? The day after the Chauvin verdict, did you create space for students to be able to talk to each other? And for an equity leader, it's really thinking about ensuring, did your district put out a statement after these events? Are they talking about it? Did you provide resources from the district level for the leaders to be able to have those conversations? And are you giving spaces? Like, so a lot of equity officers are at the cabinet level. Did the meeting that you have that next day, did you ensure that there was space for reflection from your colleagues? And then that last part is the really critical part as leaders, right? It's like, how do you make sure that you're disrupting and dismantling systemic oppression? And for us, those actions aligned that can help you get there is focusing on instruction, facilitating adult learning and development, managing operations, and strategizing change and continuous improvement. And again, what does that look like is for leaders is really thinking about what's in my realm of control, right? And how can I ensure that I'm changing and thinking about scheduling, hiring, discipline. But for equity officers, we really are partners, right? We're collaborators. So we have to really be in partnership with those district leaders and helping them think about what is a new way, right? A lot of times for leaders, we're stuck in what we know and what we've seen. And as equity officers, our job is to really push to go to a space that none of us have ever seen before. So we have to be able to be in partnership with our district leaders or with our colleagues to help them get to a place of the unknown. So with that, I want to take the time to really dive into the conversation and really be able to hear from Peter and Gilmara about how they themselves have embodied this definition of culturally responsive leadership, as well as how have they supported the leaders in Des Moines in order to get there as well. So I am always interested to hear about how folks got here, right? And how have you decided to really take on this role of being an equity leader within a district that always has its challenges and no day is ever the same. So tell us, starting with Gilmara, tell me about your leadership journey and what inspired you to take on an equity role in Des Moines Public Schools.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you for having me. I am so excited to talk to equity practitioners all over the nation. We need to do that more often. So my trajectory to an equity, a diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner didn't follow the regular path. I was a teacher at the Des Moines Public Schools. And before that, I taught at the international school in Brazil. I am from Brazil, and I was relocating from Brazil to the US. And so found a job at the Des Moines Public Schools as a first grade teacher. And meanwhile, I was getting my master's degree in counseling, school counseling. And when I graduated, I started doing a little bit of counseling, and then I got a job as a leadership consultant for Heartland Area Education Agency, which is a state agency in Iowa that serves 98 school districts. Des Moines is one of them. And when I was hired straight from my first grade classroom to coach superintendents, believe it or not. And when I got that position, I was very excited, but I realized I noticed that there was a need for them to do a little work around equity. And at the time, 16 years ago in Iowa, that was not in the radar. I couldn't even find professional learning opportunities to attend nationally. So I had to go to a lot of business sessions that were more HR oriented to learn and to start doing the work. And then with time, I asked the HR director to create a position for me at our agency to be a person who is specialized in DEI. And luckily they did that. And that's what I have been doing for the last 15 years. And my partnership with Des Moines it started 6 years ago when the superintendent asked me to devote my time to them full time instead of serving 98 districts. So we started piloting a different model of partnering with this school district. And it was like I was fully embedded. I have a key to the building. I have an email address. I have a budget. I had the budget. I hired people. I developed positions. And so I was pretty much working alongside them. It wasn't like a drive-through kind of professional learning delivery. And I love that because I got to know them well and I got to feel part of something that was ongoing. Oh, and I started my PhD in organizational behavior with a focus on trust in the workplace, and never finished my dissertation, but really greatly enjoyed the learning.
Well, I would just start out by saying thank you all for having me and providing the invitation into this space today. I really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to the conversation and the learning that will take place today. My story is not as exciting as Gilmara's. I took the more traditional route to get here. I am a transplant as well, though. I am originally from Houston, which is where my journey started. I am a second generation educator. My mom was an educator all my life. There's a third generation educator. My oldest daughter is at Howard University right now, studying to be an early childhood teacher. And so it is in the blood, I say, for us being in this business of education. As far as this work with equity, for me, it is what we do. It is what I have always been about as an educator. Naming it and being embedded in the work intentionally at the district level began for me about 6 years ago when Gilmara joined Des Moines Public Schools. There was an opportunity for me. I spoke to our associate superintendent and said I wanted to do more, and there was an opportunity to lift my voice and share my voice in what was happening in the schools. So I was a part of the teams with Gilmara in developing the professional learning for our leaders, lending voice to different systems that were being created throughout the organization. I sat down and did the IDI with Gilmara and had our follow-up conversation after that. And so it's just really been a process of, it's internal. This work is internal for me. It's not a thing for me that I do off to the side. And so it's about sharing that and sharing with folks kind of how I got there and creating the conditions to help folks get there themselves.
And Mary, may I add that in Des Moines, we have a unique structure for the equity position. We don't have one person that carries that title, and we don't have an office, a special office for that. It's everybody's responsibility. And so 6 years ago, when I was asked to collaborate with them, that was something that was really important for me. I did not want to have an office, a specific location, or a title, because I wanted to build systems and structures that created sustainability, knowing that I wasn't going to be there forever, so that I could leave and the work could remain in place.
So which leads me, thank you for that, Gilmara and Peter. And I'm curious to hear a little bit more about how do you two work together in collaboration? As well as I know you all are both part of the talent team. So we'd love to hear a little bit just kind of about also the overall structure of that.
So like Peter mentioned, when I started 6 years ago, my main goal was to develop foundational language and develop some teams that could help carry on the work, so it wasn't just resting on my shoulders. I believe that this work is collaborative, and unless we have a stakeholder voice involved in every step, we don't hit the mark. And so I put together 7 teams to elevate stakeholder voice and to design the work with me. And one of the teams was a team of leaders who were passionate about equity in our schools. And Peter was one of them. And Peter came to all the meetings for 2.5 years. They helped me design and deliver the professional learning that we were offering district-wide to the 500 leaders that we were working closely with. And little by little, I started stepping out of the role of leading those teams, because I wanted for them to take over those teams and start leading those teams. And honestly, right now, if I leave tomorrow, they won't even miss me, because they are doing the work all by themselves. And I just get to sit and watch and sometimes provide feedback and participate. But honestly, they're carrying it on. Every department, every leader knows how they need to structure the work to make it meaningful for their department and for us to reach our board goals. They're centered around racial equity. And Peter and I are both part of leading our talent support team, that it's a team that was created to develop leaders who are equity-driven leaders in our system. Peter, do you wanna add anything to that?
Yeah, one I'll add, we would miss her if she was gone. I know she's trying to be humble there, but we would miss her if she left us. Yeah, and our current structure now is, like Gilmara shared, it is centered around the ownership of this work doesn't live in one department. The ownership of this work is everywhere. And so our team is focused on continuing to build that capacity within the different departments around our board goals, as well as what we have now are we have some identified levers that have come through our community problem solving process. So we've gone out to our community and asked of them, and our school board asked of them, what is it that you want for your children? What is it that you want of us in service of your children? And this summer, we also partnered with the Leadership Academy and conducted some anti-racist town halls. And again, we were just questioning, how are we doing with this work? Share with us what has been, we've been doing this for 6 years now. What is the impact, and what things do we still need to work on? And so our work now is centered around those identified levers that they said, if you, as leaders in this district, if you all focus in on these 7 things and you respond to the findings that we have shown, that we've shared with you, then we're going to see growth, and we're going to see our students and the experiences that they're having within schools each day being more fulfilling, and our students really feeling that increasing that learning, thriving, and belonging that we like to talk about a lot within DMPS. And so Gilmara and I, as a part of that team and as a part of the leadership team within talent support, we work a lot around how do we support leadership, and how do we build and create systems that are ones that are focused on dismantling some of the systemic oppressions and racism and the marginalization that happens within our schools. So we are a part of the work that, one, we had to fully acknowledge that those things exist. And so we are at a place now where, as a district, in all departments, we fully acknowledge that these things are existing, and us at the cabinet level are really now looking at that and saying, well, what are some goals that we can co-create as a cabinet in service of the findings and the levers that we can then collaborate around and create collective actions around to dismantle these things and fundamentally change the way we are doing business in our schools and in our organization.
I forgot to mention that there is going to be Q&A at the end of this, but if questions come up as Gilmara and Peter are talking, so please feel free to put those questions in the chat. So Peter, you mentioned the anti-racist town halls, and one of those levers that came out of that was about the need to diversify your pipeline, right? And the need to diversify the staffing. So I'm curious about what strategies you are currently using or thinking about in the districts to diversify particularly the school leadership pipeline.
Well, one of the things is my role, right, that I'm currently sitting in right now as a principal on special assignment. I was a sitting principal for the past 9 years in the district. And then I wanted to do more. I reached out to our executive director and said, hey, I want to be a part of what's happening and play a bigger role in that. And so I was able to go on special assignment right around the time that the town halls were taking place. So I was able to be a part of those in a lot of different ways. And in that opened up a principal role. And so through that special assignment placement for myself, we were able to open up some internship opportunities for leaders in our district. And a big piece of that is we were able to identify some of the typical barriers that were presented in filtering out folks of color in our leadership positions. And we were able to change some things and open up some of those break down some of those barriers through the internship process. So now when we talk about you have to have this licensure in order to be an administrator, well, that licensure, you can be working towards that licensure instead of being fully licensed in order to be an intern in this role. We also were able to change the actual vetting and hiring process for the internship, which allowed us to then place through that process, we were able to hire a sitting associate principal, which was a female of color. So we doubled down when thinking about marginalized groups and oppressed groups in this business. We were able to double down there. And her role actually opened up an associate principal position, which we were able to place an African-American male in that role. And so those positions are unique in that they receive all of the supports that any other person in that role would receive as a first-year person, but they also receive very specific support from me in my role. And so I meet with them weekly or bi-weekly, just depending on them. Actually, the one who was replacing me at my school just this week, she's a tremendous leader and a tremendous leader in this work. Her name is Carrie Romo. She was just recently announced as the new middle school principal for us. And so that's one way. We're also doing some collaboration with our human resources department to really look at and start to interrogate policy and start to look at what are some of those things on the front end before we get into phone screeners. What are those things that might be weeding folks out? We need to really re-look at those things and interrogate and ask ourselves some questions about, what's needed, what's not, and what the data that we're looking at, what is it saying that we value? Is it looking at is it allowing for alternate ways or alternate pathways for the school leadership to happen? So that's also some work that's happening. And we are also getting better connected with HBCUs, not only around us, but nationally, and connecting with them in different ways to say, hey, here we are. And we do have folks of color in Iowa. I know you might not think about that when you think of Iowa, but if you spent any time in Des Moines, Iowa, or Des Moines Public Schools specifically, you would see that many of our schools, most of them are schools where the majority of our students are students of color. And as a district, we are majority students of color who need those models in their lives on a consistent basis. So we're doing some work there as well.
And can I add something too, Peter? We, because Iowa is a white state, 94% of our population is white. Recruiting and hiring for racial diversity is a challenge. And one of the things we realize is that our students are extremely racially diverse. And so we have put a lot of focus on Dream to Teach, which is an internal program that nurtures the students who are interested in a teaching educational career, and they are assigned from 6th grade to 12th grade to a teacher mentor who helps them get into education. And so I think that's internally preparing our students to go into education. As we know, a lot of across the nation, students of color are not going into educational fields, and it becomes harder and harder to recruit people of color, especially in states that are predominantly white. And so Dream to Teach has been, and this internal pipeline has been something that has provided us with a lot of recruiting opportunities that we wouldn't have had otherwise. And these students know our system. They know what we need to do. So I feel like it's a gift to have them come and help us figure this out.
I feel like you named the primary challenges, Gilmara, in diversifying your pipeline in regards to, also Peter, right? So there's this myth about the diversity of Iowa. Number one, they have to overcome, and then being able to actually then help cultivate and get folks into the roles that wanted to be interested. Are there any other struggles or lessons learned that you have as a district?
Yeah, one of the things Peter touched on that I feel it's crucial for us to consider as we look at recruiting and hiring educators of color is really questioning the status quo. So we have had some difficult conversations with HR, because if a person had something in their background from 20 years ago, let's say they had a marijuana charge from 20 years ago, and they were a person of color that we really wanted, that had volunteered in our schools and had shown to be extremely effective, we couldn't hire them because of that mark on their record from 20 years ago. And so really challenging the HR team on some of these practices that we felt were a roadblock for us to increase our racial diversity and our leaders. And the other thing is certification, like Peter said, a lot of times we believe we need the certifications, but do we really? And so there were some positions that we were able to identify that we really didn't need them. And that opened the pool greatly for us. So these were two areas that were very challenging to navigate, and we're still working through, that I think were major.
Yeah, and that's what, and I don't want to leave. We are not there yet, and I want to make that very clear today. We are working on becoming more inclusive, and each time we go through a new process, we find out that there's work to do there, and so we celebrate what we can celebrate, and then we go back and we figure out, okay, we have a gap here. We're not being as inclusive as we thought we would be. And we're finding that out now as we're in hiring season now. We're finding that out. And so, the willingness at the heart of this work is the collaboration and the willingness to have the conversation. And that's what's been important, an important part of this transformation for us, and why it's been so important in us, in Gilmara's vision of this work doesn't belong in one person's hands, or this work belongs to all of us. And because we all see ourselves in this work, it allows for those tough conversations that we have to have. When we have a principal or an AP position and we look at the candidate pool and it might not be how we want it to look, then we can say, hey, let's talk about that. Let's have a conversation about where do the gaps exist in this space, and what can we do better the next time.
And the other aspect that I feel we made an intentional effort to switch to is, how do we interview people? Because a lot of times our interview communicates, like Peter said, emphasis on skills and certifications. And we wanted people with lived experiences that our students have in the central office. And so how would our interview process highlight the emphasis on lived experiences as much as skills and certifications? And so we changed our questions completely. I sat with the person who graded the written answers, and we had lots of conversations. I would grade some and she would grade some, and then we would compare them and talk. And we were looking at them in a very different way. And that impacted people's score and how they got hired. And so it was really interesting to do that exercise as well.
And I just share one more thing just to that point with the hiring of folks. A practice we have now that we're getting really good at in helping us diversify our workforce is at making kids a part of the process. Our kids are phenomenal in, they're like, no, that's not for us. Or yeah, I like what they're putting down. And so having the kids be a huge part of the process, especially if it's directly in a role that is directly connected to them, that has been a game changer for us too.
That's powerful. And should just highlight that, just the power and the need to, right? If we're about students, and students should be part of that process. There's a question about the Dream to Teach program, but I think they're being answered. So, okay, so we already got there. There's a question about the number of students that it's there. I'm curious, they wanted to know, how many students do you recruit for the Dream to Teach program in 6th grade?
I don't have the exact number right now on the top of my head, but I know the program started really small, and over time, over the last 6 years, it has grown quite a bit. but I will send you the numbers, the exact numbers, because I cannot recall how many sixth graders we have right now.
Coming out of the middle school, we might have had like 20 total kids who were a part of Dream to Teach coming out of my school. And there were a handful of kids per grade level. So there's about 4, 5, 6 graders. The work with Dream to Teach is, on the front end, figuring out how do we recruit more kids and have them see the value in coming back and being a teacher. The back end work and the work we're trying to plan around and get better at is how do we stay connected with the students as they're going through their educational process in higher education. So how do we stay connected with them during that 4 or 5 year period? And then as we come back, as they come back and they're entering into those times where they're doing practicum work or where they're doing student teaching, how can we invite them in and make that, evolve and make that part of the interview process almost for them of, all right, we're going to cultivate and spend some energy and time in growing and helping support you in your growth and development as an educator, so that we know your skills and we know that when upon graduation, come on down, we got a contract ready for you and a classroom ready for you. So that's our vision and where we want to get to.
And we currently have a master's degree that it's offered with a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion and responsive teaching that every Des Moines Public Schools team member can engage in and be certified with their master's degree with an emphasis on that, as long as they stay a certain number of years. So we have that partnership with the university, and that has really helped us retain some of the professionals we want to have around.
Great. I'm going to move us to the role that brought us together, which is the equity coach role. And so I'm curious to hear a little bit about what is an equity coach in Des Moines, and how has that role changed over time?
So the equity coach, so a challenge I had 6 years ago when we put the foundational pieces in place. After that, a challenge I encountered was with 5,000 colleagues, how would I be able to get the work in the building level? I believe we always start with central office leaders, and superintendents, the first one, you start doing the development work because we want the leaders to be a step ahead and we want for them to model the work, the dispositions that we want to see in leaders when they are equity driven. However, we wanted the work to get into the building level, and we were having a hard time, depending on where the principal was at with their own development, getting it to be effective. And so in order to trickle it down to the building level, we created a pilot equity coach position, which originally we intended to have aligned with the instructional coaching positions we have. We have 126 instructional coaches in every building. There is at least one. And we wanted for them to be the equity coach. But at the time, because of a capacity issue, we couldn't do that. So we created some pilot positions in some buildings to see how would that work if we had a person devoting their time to build the capacity of the building and the principal to carry on the equity work at the building level. And that went really well. The principals really appreciated having, and the Leadership Academy was our partner in implementing that pilot. The principals really appreciated having that person there. Once they left, our goal was for that person to be a temporary assigned person so that they were aware of the fact that that wasn't a permanent support and that work fell into everybody's shoulder. And so once they left the buildings, we could tell exactly where they were because the work was a lot farther developed than in the buildings that they weren't present. However, because of a budget issue, we couldn't expand on the number of equity coaches we added to each building. And so what we decided to do was really to eliminate that position and start intentionally preparing the instructional coaches to be both. And that's the journey we are at right now. Peter and I, with our involvement with the talent support team, we moved the instructional coaching services under that team so that we would have full influence on what they received and their professional learning right now is 100% about equity.
And so, Peter, I know that you didn't have an equity coach in your school, but I'm curious about kind of what did the work look like in your building in order to create access for students and families?
Yeah, so during that process, during the time where there were equity coaches, there was still some, while there was professional learning that happened with those specific pilot schools, there was also district-wide professional learning that took place for all leaders. And so what came of that was we were then responsible for taking that learning and bringing it back to our buildings, even though we didn't have the specific equity coach to do that. That's one of the ways we were continuing to build capacity for those of us who had schools who didn't quite have those equity coaches yet. And so a big part of what we were charged to do is begin to build that capacity within the leadership within our buildings. And so one of the actions that came out of that actually is a reorientation of our assistant principals, school improvement leaders, and deans at the time. And so in order to build that capacity, there was a reorientation of all of those positions. So all of those positions went away, and they were reoriented into what we now call associate principals, who are specifically focused around instructional leadership and equity. And so through that, they all had to go through a rigorous process to be rehired in those roles, again, with the specific expectation that they were to co-lead the equity work along with the principal in the school. And so so while during that in-between time in a building like mine, it was about us and building that commitment within the school to the work. So it began with us just, we've got to talk about race. We can't continue to operate as a school and act like what we look like doesn't exist. And so, every time I stood in front of them, I was talking to them about me. Yeah, I'm a Black man. Here I am. I need you to see that. I need you to know that about me, because there's some things about that, because I identify that way, there's some things that go on in my mind and things that I have to think about and ways that I react and respond are because of who I am and how I identify. And I need y'all to know that, because we have kids who are walking our halls every single day who are experiencing these things, and you need to have that level of awareness. We would bring back things. I was fortunate. I was a part of the teams who were developing the leadership, the professional learning for the leadership, for the entire leadership team. And so I was able to bring those things back into my building and deliver that professional learning around that, to stay connected to, here's what I'm learning and I'm making meaning of it this way. So I want y'all to learn it too, so we can begin to make meaning of this stuff together as a collective. I need you to make meaning of it for yourself, but we are a team, and we are in service of our kids in this community. So how can we make meaning of this together? That changes actions, that changes how we respond to things, that changes, that might actually change how you believe and what you believe is happening in this world. And so that's how all of those pieces connected for me. But as we made the shift into moving this work into the instructional coach, that's when it became more, and the reorientation of the associate principal, that's when it became more systematic, and it was spread out for everyone.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that, because I feel like that's something that Des Moines has really done well, is making sure that it's integrated into the system, right? So this is not just something that one person is responsible for. This is like amazing. There's an amazing leader in Peter, so he'll do it. But how is it ensuring that when Peter leaves, that the work keeps going? And so I've always been impressed by the approach that you've taken as a district. And one approach that you have done as well to really support your leaders is the IDI. So I'm curious curious to hear more a little bit about what is the IDI again, and then how have you used it as a tool to support principals, particularly, right? I feel like it's a lot around their personal journeys.
Yeah, so the IDI is the Intercultural Development Inventory. And I have a belief that in this work, we always have to start with the leaders and doing personal work. Because if we don't change the way we embrace others and the way we look at them and include them, we can't change policies and resources and practices effectively. And so, in my opinion, the personal work comes first and never comes off the table. You start with it and you keep building layers around it. And so we use that tool to really decrease the resistance that we encountered getting into the work. And when people think they're cooking with gas when it comes to including others, and when they realize they're not in the stages in the continuum through the IDI that show you are truly inclusive and you can connect across difference, that creates a sense of urgency. And so we have every one of our leaders, 500 people go through the IDI. And that was a big part of my job. And for them to receive the result, they're required to have a 1-hour coaching session with me. And with that, I got to know them extremely well personally, and we set goals for themselves, for all the leaders, in terms of their own personal ability to connect across difference. Because our challenge is we have a very white staff and a very racially diverse student population. And so unless we are able to nurture the white colleagues we have and help them develop their individual skills to connect with people who are different from them, we'll never be able to succeed. And so we put a lot of effort into raising their awareness for where they were at when it came to connecting with people who are different from them and setting goals for themselves. And that was really exciting to see them getting on that journey. The other thing that the IDI provides is a team result. So not only the leader knew where they were, but they also knew where their team fell, because the decisions that were being made were according to the stage they fell as a team. And that was really important. And the first person that did the IDI was the superintendent. And so we started with the superintendent and went through his cabinet and then through the next layer, until everybody had gone through.
And you can still see the impacts of that work because folks are still creating and making goals around where they were in this process. And I don't know if Gilmara remembers, but my goal was wrapped around how do I share my learning and my journey and who I am and where I am, and in support of the work because of where I landed on the continuum.
That's exactly what you're doing.
That's why I'm where I'm at right now, is because that was the work that was the goal for me, was I've got to have a greater reach to help support folks in that way.
So if they fell on the stages of the continuum that indicated they were able to effectively connect across difference, then I would ask them, what are you going to do? Because you have a responsibility now to build capacity, to share what you have learned with others that are around you. And so with that, we kind of created a little cohort of people who were helping develop others and really help them move along the continuum, because our goal was to have the 500 top leaders on the effective sides of the continuum.
Thank you. And Gilmara, I know in the chat, there's folks are asking about the, I know there's a certification process that you went through to become that. So I'm sure folks would love to hear more.
Yeah, there is a certification process that you go through that it's very intense. It's a 3-day course. But honestly, that doesn't teach you, it just teaches you to interpret the information. It doesn't teach you how to do the development work or how to coach people. And so if you were to select somebody in your district to be your IDI administrator, I would pick people who are strong coaches and who are good talking about difficult things. These are the two main skills you have to have, because it's highly personal and it's very threatening. Some principals would say to me, I didn't sleep yesterday because I knew I had this meeting today about my IDI, and I was so anxious because they thought that would impact their performance review, which was a completely separate thing. The IDI is development work, and we wanted to keep it separate from compliance work, because for us, we measure a leader's effectiveness in students' outcomes and equity-driven behaviors. Now, the IDI and the personal journey is a very gray area to try to measure for performance and evaluation. So we did not go that way. The IDI was strictly coaching and helping from each other, and really trying to create opportunities for people to raise awareness of where they were at.
So I'm curious, Peter, to hear more about other strategies that you're currently using to support your leaders on their path to culture responsiveness.
One of the big ones, and this is specifically in response to our town halls and and then after the town halls, we actually started having conversations. We had a conversation with our Black employees. And it was overwhelming that there was a need for creating spaces where folks can learn and heal together as an identity group. And so one of the things, one piece of my work that is happening right now is creating racial affinity groups where we can do some healing together and groups, but also do some learning together as well. So I've been doing a lot, gotten a lot of resources from the Leadership Academy. Actually found a school district, and it goes by a number. It's not a name. It's a numbered school district. But I actually have been connecting and networking with them because they have actually launched, had a successful launch within some of their schools. So we are connecting and building a network of sharing of resources and things as we are continuing to build this out, because they want to eventually get to the district level. So right now we're identifying, we're in the process of building out job descriptions to identify leaders of these different groups. And one thing is this is another opportunity and another pathway for leadership that did not exist in our district. So again, when we talk about hiring and diversifying our workforce, when we think about leadership, we have to broaden what that word leader means within our district. And in that means that as that job description is being created, thinking about, this doesn't need to say that you have to be a teacher in order to lead this group. You could be a great leader of this group and a great leader of this conversation and be whatever role you play in the organization. And so there will be some professional learning and development that will take place over the summer with those 7 leaders. We're really starting out there with the racial identities to get us started, specifically in response to those town hall findings. I have already been challenged, and I know I will continue to be challenged by other groups, other identities. And I have let them know that, there's going to be a space and a place for that too. And right now we're starting this in response to that, because the thing that we want to connect to this is monitoring, what's this impact on retention for us? What's this impact on the sense of belonging? When we talk about when we take our staff perception survey through Gallup, how is this helping increase how they feel about working within DMPS? And so, and really allowing folks who didn't always have the opportunity to do any sort of professional learning outside of what would be traditional training for a role that they play. But when we think about professional learning and growth as a human, in this work that we do with kids, that is a big piece of what we're putting in place to start the next school year.
Yeah, Peter has really been tackling retention, because it doesn't do any good. Retention is a huge issue. It's almost bigger than hiring and recruiting, in my opinion. And it doesn't do any good to bring people in and not have the culture that helps them feel they belong, or helps them see that they have a fair shot at career advancement. And so what Peter has done to mentor and create networks that connect people of color has been really to tackle our retention issue, you know, and disrupt the barriers we identify as leaders, listening to them and what they encounter in our system. So I think that's essential. And I honestly think having him do that work is being powerful, because I feel we needed Black men talking to some people who had never had a Black leader talk to them, you know, and I recognize Peter and I have very different identities, and how we resonate with different people is different because of that. And so I am so thankful I have a Black colleague who can help with that part of the work and support his other Black colleagues who might not have had that opportunity before in the past.